Encaustic Art, Lesson 5, Hot Plate Basics. Now we're still using the Encaustic Art wax blocks, and this time melting them onto an upturned surface like the small cradled iron here, but we're actually working onto the A2 Plus Ultimate Hot Plate. This is a glass-topped hot plate, good size surface, and all those red lines are the heating elements, so it's very evenly heated. It's very simple to use. There's only two controls. The on-off switch is the illuminated button, so you just switch that to on. And then you've got the opportunity to change the thermostat setting somewhere between 1 and 12. Now this thermostat is very high quality. 12 is the hottest, 1 is the coolest. And normally you're working somewhere between 4 and 10. Quite often sort of 6, 7, 8 where it is now. And it will hold that temperature just clicking gently on and off all day long. Cleaning it is very easy. Whilst it's warm, just wipe with tissue. If you want to improve the cleaning, use a bit of old candle or a bit of clear wax and just wipe that on first. Now the size of it is an A2. It'll take an A2 quite easily. That's 400 by 600. And the card that we're using is 300 gram white or coloured card. You can use watercolour paper. In fact, any substrate you can think of. Now, some people want to fix the support they're working onto very firmly, like this. This is using masking tape, paper tape. Other people, using the same type of tape, just use small little sections of it. It's just to stop the card running around, because it's on a hot surface. It's quite useful to leave a small area of the hot plate open so that you can mix colours or put colours down on there. And if you want to keep the back of your support clean, then use a bit of waste paper, put your support on top of that, stick it down, and then stick the waste paper on to the hot plate. The hot plate can be used as a palette where you melt the colours directly onto the plate, and you can mix them with brushes. You can keep them in tins where you can have wells of single molten colours. And loading your brushes or mixing in little saucepans. You can lay all your tools on to keep them warm, like the brushes at the top of the picture there. And this is providing a stable, adjustable temperature. Remember, it's a good size, 16 by 24 inches, so you can get quite large work on. There are 48 colours of the blocks. That's what we're using. They're made on this machine. And they come in colours that are all intermixable. Some of them are opaque, some of them are translucent, and you can change all those. Now, working onto the card, you can see the simplest way is just to, well, wipe the block as though you were sort of crayoning, and then you can work onto that wax, here using a piece of tissue to texture it. This is a sponge, good for sort of dabbing or for edge marks, and there are all sorts of sponges to be had. Rubber stamps, you can use the edges of those. This is just a piece of torn off card from the front of the tissue box. Palette knives come in all shapes and sizes, so there's no shortage of things that you can use as tools. Here's a small selection. These are called Japanese knives, I think, and they often use for fillers in walls. They're metal, so they can be heated. They're quite interesting to use and can do some nice effects. Brushes, of course, use natural hair rather than man-made. Rubber-tipped shapers, movers are useful for pushing the wax around. Here making bamboo, and of course this is a piece of sponge. You can use any shaped sponge or implement you can think of for similar things. Now these are the sponges. The white ones are solid and the orange one is more porous, and it's very good for foliage, dabbing, whereas the white block is more for pushing the wax around. Rollers are another useful tool. This is a sponge roller, great for making edges and lines. This is a torn, sort of damaged roller, and it's been torn so that it creates an interesting effect. And rollers can be used loaded on the hot plate to spread wax onto canvas and so on. Of course, you can also use your heated tools like the iron, here being used a bit like the tip of a palette knife. This is a hairdryer, but you could use a hot air gun equally. But you don't need to apply extra heat, obviously. Now let's have a look at this picture demonstrated by John Buckland, which is a fantasy landscape, and just sort of see a basic way of beginning your experiments. So John's applying the wax just by rubbing it backwards and forwards, a bit like sort of crayoning, but because the heat's coming up through the card, it easily melts. And here, going over those initial colours with some yellow, so that creates more liquid, softens the colour, blends it together as well. You can use all sorts of techniques just by applying the blocks directly, handheld. Now this is a tissue pad, like Kleenex type of tissue that you blow your nose on, and that can be used for all sorts of things. It's a very useful material. Here John's just rubbing to make the sky, and what he's doing is very, very gently stroking from side to side to blend the colours, take some of the excess wax off. Now you don't have to use an iron obviously because the hot plate is already heating the wax, but by using an iron it's a very quick way of applying colour, quite dense colour, to the card. So the iron's used in just the normal way, but you could do a similar thing by crayoning onto the card first and then taking a palette knife that you've allowed to warm up, or even a piece of card to sort of drag the colours around. But John's using the iron here, and that's quite okay. Again, back to the tissue pad, just to introduce a bit of foreground space, maybe take some of the colour out. You can always put more colour on, as has been shown here, and obviously by using the tissue you can take colour off. But John's actually going to demonstrate using tissue to make marks. So here he's pushing the wax into forms to create some interest and detail in the foreground. You can see the finger behind the tissue there. And obviously, because it's a fantasy landscape, there's no fixed way of operating. You don't have to have known things in the foreground. The iron can be used. Quite an interesting point here is that because the card is flat on a rigid surface, the hot plate surface, when you lift it, it doesn't peel off the card, it actually snaps off. And as it snaps off, it gives far less detail than the sort of foliage coral-like effect that you quite often get when the card and the iron peel apart. So again, a bit more pushing just to work the colours. And you could use the tip of the iron as John is here, but you could also equally use a palette knife or a bit of rubber or a bit of card, a comb, anything you can think of that will make marks that you like the forms of. A bit more detail, some nice structure just to give definition. And in a fantasy landscape you can see that the foreground is populated with something that gives the feeling of being near. Now remember, wax is easily applied to the card just by crayoning, but in order to spread this around you can quite easily use a roller. Now the roller will give a nice even type of effect. This is Elizabeth van Uden demonstrating some sort of practice techniques, and you can see how she's left part of the hot plate open so she can put wax there to load the roller, and she's working in a very sort of organised and systematic way using different parts of the roller. Here she's just making a circular centre, and so you can make lines with the edge of the roller, you can even colours out, but the rollers tend to degenerate into the darkest colour you've ever used. Cleaning the exposed part of the hot plate with tissue and clear wax, as we mentioned earlier on. Obviously you can get different size rollers. This is a little small one. These are foam rollers just used for regular decorating. And this larger roller is being used, as we saw a little bit earlier on, to put wax onto a piece of canvas using hot air work. So the A2 Plus Ultimate Hot Plate is a very versatile tool. There's more in Exploring Ideas DVD, where Michael Bossum, John Buckland, Beanie Cronin and Anna Maria Eigner all demonstrate different aspects of either hot plate or hot air or collage work. There's quite a lot of things on this. It's a 2-hour program, and quite stimulating if you want to have some ideas of where you can take encaustic if you're developing. And then From Hobby to Art is by Elizabeth van Uden. This is a DVD that Elizabeth shows 5 sections of hot air work, basic hot air work, and then 7 sections of hot plate work, leading from hobby to art. You can find more out on encaustic.com. The A2 Plus Ultimate Hot Plate is the thing to get.